they created masterpieces.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to help them do that. They do it mostly behind their back. My book sort of points out that you have to take moral risks, but then it's sensible to try to take the moral risks in order where you're increasing in the riskiness each time. If you don't know the reason why somebody would hate you, you haven't listened for difference. That's the most extreme version of it.
Hello, team. Today we see many leaders confused, almost paralyzed by uncertainty, many of us opting to play it safe. But what if we could take to leading with more moral courage, with more vision and originality? How could organizations become not just successful, but admirable, distinctive, transformative even? In this episode, we explore leadership as a masterpiece creation. Organizations that are willing to instill bold new moral norms, to challenge the status quo and inspire others. And joining us to discuss these ideas, Professor, philosopher, management consultant, Charles Spinoza. Charles, welcome to the ET Project. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Wayne. That's a lovely introduction. That's exactly what the book that I just wrote is about, having that
Well,
moral imagination and acting boldly on it.
we're going to dive into the book. I mean, we could start by getting a bit of backstory, but we have so much, let's say, colourful discussion ahead of us. I don't want to waste too much time on, but maybe you could just give us a very brief overview of, a little backstory and what brought you to where we are.
Okay, I'll try to do it really briefly. I started out not as a management consultant, but as actually a professor of English literature. I taught Shakespeare for some years at Miami University in Ohio. And then I started publishing in philosophy, and I ended my academic career as a philosopher. In both those worlds, both those disciplines, I was always interested in how human beings transform themselves, how we, in a certain sense, become who we are. We're not really ourselves and how we're constantly becoming. I talked about how Shakespeare did that when I was teaching Shakespeare. I spoke about how Heidegger and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche got us doing that when I did philosophy. I wrote my first book in 1997 with a philosopher and with a management consultant on what innovation in business looked like from a philosopher's perspective, and that led me into management consulting. I started at management consulting, interested in how people innovate and interested in helping leaders find their defining passion. And my original view was if you found your defining passion, the big consulting triumph was with Fernando. We were consulting with Lorenzo Zambrano, the CEO of Cemex, which at that time was a very small cement company. It's become the third or second largest in the world. His defining passion was to bring to Mexico first world transparency in debt and raising debt and so forth. And it was amazing because he had that passion. He could have more sophisticated strategies and
Mm.
he could take harder hits than other people. I won't go through the story, but when you have a defining passion, you get challenged in that defining passion. He was challenged in a very hard way and was able to see his way through it. In any case, that's how it started out. And I started working that way and helping people innovate. But as I worked more and more with leaders, I discovered about 10 years ago that leaders really have a sense, it's going to seem like an obvious discovery, a moral sense of what the right way to treat customers is, what the right way to treat employees is, what the right way to treat owners is, and the right way to treat managers. And when I say right way, I mean they meant morally right. It took me a while to put that together, but I saw that when they did that, when they could take the risks to do those things, it always requires risks. We can come back to that. They created masterpieces.
Mm.
And so I wanted to help them do that. They do it mostly behind their back. Why? Well, they're taught in business school and they're taught by consultants like me. Follow this framework. All consultants have 4-box frameworks. They have all sorts of frameworks. Follow this one recipe after another recipe after another recipe. We give leaders recipes. And if you're a leader, what's your life like? Well, you end up fighting a lot of fires. You end up having to make a lot of snap decisions. It's tough. So if you got recipes there, and if the recipes work and they give you operational excellence, of course you'll follow them. And I learned to begin asking leaders, what always goes wrong in your organization? And when I found out they had an answer, that's when I said, I've got to write this book. I've got to write uh, leadership as masterpiece creation. What the humanities can tell business leaders about moral risk taking. And so that's the backstory. I can fill in lots more details. But
We will talk a lot, Charles, about the book. So I think it's a perfect setup. I do have to ask if you could define masterpiece organization. What is it that we're referring to when you talk about a masterpiece? And then we have probably this mental image of some sort of Rembrandt or a painting looking like a masterpiece. What does it you mean when you talk about masterpiece organization?
by the way, I love that. You can think of an artistic masterpiece, and the cover of my book is an artistic masterpiece. But for me, a masterpiece organization is an organization that's morally distinctive. It doesn't have to be an organization that we love, but it's one that's morally distinctive. Let me give three examples so you can get a sense of that. The one that I talk about in the book is Anita Roddick's The Body Shop.
Yeah.
That organization, she was dealing with the beauty business back in the 90s. And how did you sell cosmetics and skincare to women? Well, you made them feel anxious about their looks. The more anxiety they had, the more they had to buy stuff. She thought that was just terribly wrong. She created an organization defined by values of compassion, most importantly, having fun in the store, trying stuff on. She was the first one to do that sampling, and taking care, finding a way to take care of yourself, not anxiously try to make yourself look good, but actually take care of yourself as a whole. That was a moral break from the industry as it was. And that made it distinctive. Now, when you do that, it also turns out to be aesthetically distinctive. And she worked on the aesthetics that would go along with that. Another morally distinctive company, a lot of people don't like it, is Bezos's Amazon. Now, whether you embrace Amazon or not, I think you can't help but see it as distinctive. He wanted to save retail on the internet. I think most people don't remember that in the 90s, the internet was actually wild. It was full of all sorts of job boards, Craigslist, all sorts of lists. And you could buy options on things. You could buy all sorts of things. You didn't know if what you were buying was for real, whether it was fraudulent, and so forth. And it was sort of a wild west. And he wanted to tame it. And he thought that to tame it, and I think we have to grant him, he might have been right about this, he had to create a company where people worked relentlessly, where he was constantly raising the bar on expectations of employees, where he was frugal and where he was fanatical about customers. And he created that organization, and it was actually quite ruthless. His first logistics genius, who was a genius, who saved Amazon. In fact, Bezos was the one that called him a genius. He wanted to play worked 30 hours a week and play Frisbee the rest of his time and hang out with his wife. That was not relentless. Bezos nearly fired him. His name was, I can't remember his first name. His name was something Lovejoy. The same thing happened with his founding employee, the guy that created the Amazon site. When it was time to create the second site, Bezos, who had promised him a job for life, saw that he probably was not up to Bezos' standards. And so he forcibly retired him. His name was Shel Kaplan. It's that kind of ruthlessness. Now, Amazon is enormously successful, and it's enormously successful in those terms that Bezos set out. And we end up excusing him, or at least giving him a pass for those actions. That's what I mean by taking a moral risk and having moral luck. And he created that kind of distinctive organization. Relentlessness is its key. Look at Google. That's a completely different kind of organization. Google started out as a kind of follow your dreams. As much as Google can, you follow your talents, you get a certain amount of time each week. Now they keep on reining in and going back to it to explore whatever you love doing, whatever your talent says you should do. Google is famous for its psychological safety. Imagine the difference between Amazon and Google, and what a good life at Amazon is like, and what a good life at Google is like. And go contrast that with an erotics body shop. For me, those are three very distinctive good lives that you can have. They're not suited for everybody. Not everybody can work at Amazon, not everybody can work at Google, not everybody could work at the body shop, but they're morally distinctive. And when you have an organization that's got sharply etched moral distinctiveness like that, I call that a masterpiece. Let me add one thing. It has to be admirable, of course, across a wide number of people. Somebody could say, right, that some organized crime unit or a cartel has a morally sharply etched order of its own, and they might even call it a moral order simply because it's so orderly. My pluralism does not extend that far. It has to be admirable to wide groups of people. So that's the other thing I add to.
The word admirable comes up a lot throughout your book, and I think it's an important attachment to the whole philosophy across the book, because as we were discussing before we came on air, it could be seen as a very controversial book, and you make alignments with a lot of very notable characters over history in your writing. But one area, and even in the title of the book, that really stands out is the humanities aspect. So you draw on the humanities a lot: philosophy, literature, history, the arts, and how that shapes leadership thinking. Why do you believe so much in the humanities being an essential tool for business leaders?
Well, okay, I don't know if I can give you a short answer for this. I mean, the easiest answer is that's where I come from. That's where I saw business. That's where I see the struggles that people have. There are tons of consultants and other people, other advisors who can give people in business recipes for operational excellence. But that's not where I find the hearts of most leaders lying. And when I say most, I mean, in my consulting career, I mean 90%. 90% of the leaders I've dealt with want to do something more than have operational excellence. They want to test their view of what the right way to deal with people is. And that's what their business is. Yeah, we look at small businesses that line the street, businesses up and down Madison Avenue in my neighborhood. You look at each one, there's a vision there of how to treat customers, how to treat employees, and it's different. And you go to the owner and you say, why in your hardware store are you playing classical jazz music? He doesn't say, I got a consultant who said that I could earn additional profits if I distinguished myself from the hardware store down the street that plays pop music. And that's why you don't get that answer. And I don't think anybody's surprised that you don't get that answer. You get this is the right way to treat customers in a hardware store. They're here to create beautiful things in their homes. Pop music doesn't do it. So the first thing is the way I deal with people. But the more honest, I mean, that's true. Everything I said is true. But what happened is when I started out, I started working in the humanities and I started helping leaders find their defining passions, because I believe that's what you do in the humanities. You try to understand the defining passion of the person that you're reading. You try to understand, if you're reading a novel or a piece of literature, the defining passion both of the author and of the individual characters in the book. And you develop a moral imagination that way. And so that's where I started. The next thing I came to is, if you read literature, it's all full of moral conflict, from Homer straight through to James Joyce to Virginia Woolf. It's dealing with moral conflict. And if you look at what businesses are trying to do, they're trying to sell into, I believe, moral conflicts. They're trying to give you not just goods, but good lives.
Mm.
And so the products they give them when they talk about a user test, they don't just mean can you flick the switch and does it work all the time? They have a picture of how, for instance, a light switch functions in your life. You're home, you're in the dark, you need to turn on your light easily. Does it do that for you? Does it make that part of life easy for you? Um, and is it better to have Alexa that you shout at and have her turn on the light? Is that the advance or not? People are thinking about what makes a life good for people in business. And so it's this constellation of things that lead me to the humanities. Now, you could very well say, Charles, it's because you started from the humanities that you end up there. I confess it may be. I don't have enough introspection to know if I had started in business, whether I would have come to the humanities. But I do believe the people I run into and the questions that they're really trying to solve are questions that the
Mm.
humanities have been thinking, people in the humanities have been thinking about.
Thank you for that. I mean, it clears up some of the questions I had in my mind as I was going through the book. But thank you for that. You make early in the book you make a distinction between moral norms and various other kinds of norms. So
Yeah.
that almost in a hierarchical sense, you talk about moral norms, then legal, conventional, prudential. Can you walk us through the differences and how they show up differently?
Wayne, first of all, I have to thank you for asking that. I have had more people say to me, Charles, how is it this early in the book you you had the gall to make me think about different kinds of norms? It's philosophy. I didn't come to your book for philosophy. I want to say that the whole book is not that way, but it's really important. So moral norms are norms where we are clear that it's a right or wrong that we don't want to violate. Uh, and some of our laws actually embody moral norms. Do not steal, do not commit murder. Those are moral. Some drive on the left side of the road. In some countries, drive on the right side of the road. In other countries, we see those as conventions for organizing ourselves. Uh, it's wrong to break the conventions because it leads you to violate other norms. You're putting other people in danger needlessly, right? That's immoral. But but conventions are conventions, and the third kind of norm that we have are prudential norms, and those are the norms that most people in business uh, uh, try to adhere to and try to define what their business is. It's prudent not to charge too much to your
Mhm.
customers. It's prudent to give customers, even if you might not see them again, a good experience in your business. It's prudent not to wear your employees out so that when they're dealing with customers, they can bring the customers a good experience and so forth. Those are the kinds of things that are prudent. Now you can elevate those into moral norms, and you elevate them into a moral norm and say we care so much about customers, it's absolutely essential that my employees are able to speak to the customers with a smile on their face the whole time, no matter how crabby the customer is. When you do
Right.
that and it becomes the basis of your business, then it becomes moral. Why? Because it's the right way to treat customers. And in this organization, it is just wrong. It's
Mm.
terribly wrong if you don't, and you have to be fired. It's no longer a matter of prudence. It's no longer in this instance or in that instance. It's in every instance as long as you're in this organization. This is how we treat people. Is
Right.
that I can go on. I don't want to be accused of forcing people to.
No, but I think it's important to get that distinction up front to understand. But you even then define it further when you talk about moral norms and you talk about three different types: clarifying,
Yeah.
grounding, and organizing. So maybe you could just enlighten about that as well within the organizational context.
Yeah. I think I do that. By the way, that's something that comes from Heidegger, that distinction, that
Yeah.
any organization has essentially three kinds of norms. And there are the norms, and it's so useful for understanding the history of organizations and other organizations. I can't help myself. First of all, there are the norms that are most taken for granted. And these are the ones that we don't really want to fight over. We want to take them for granted. In the United States, you just take the United States as a country. We have a taken for granted norm of neighborliness. And I think if you get to live in the United States for a while, I think you also have in other countries. I don't want to be exclusive about this.
Yeah.
You'll find yourself treating your neighbors with a kind of kindness that's different from the way you treat people in the street, familiarity and kindness, and that governs. Uh, in in uh, in when I talk about Churchill, I talk about Britain in 1940, and they had something similar. They had kind of buoyancy. And Churchill loved to mention that he's this buoyant English behavior. We're buoyant with each other, and you can sort of see the traces of that in Britain today, I believe. And I believe it also is in other Commonwealth countries. You would know better than me, Wayne, but I think there is a kind of buoyancy. Then there are the norms that we do want to get absolutely clear about, and we fight over. And in the United States, those are the libertarian norms. Those are the norms of right. Those are the norms of equality. Those are the norms of freedom. What am I free to do? Those are the things protected in our Bill of Rights. Can I say anything? How much can I say? What can't I say? Is there anything I can't say? Uh, uh, what do you have to do if you're going to arrest me? What rights do you read to me? All of that we like to get very, very clear about. Those are the clarifying. We can, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man? And so forth. Those are clarifying norms today. We work to get those as clear as we can. And then there are the norms. So, companies have these as well. And then there are the norms. What happens when a unspoken norm, a norm you don't want to speak of, like neighborliness, comes in conflict with a clarifying norm? And those then are the organizing norms that resolve that conflict. And in the United States, classically, we resolve conflicts even around the family dinner table. It's roughly like a law court. We deliberate, precedent counts. What did we do before? What did we do last time? And we try to reach a reasonable judgment. We do a kind of judicial deliberation. And it makes sense for a country like the United States where our clarifying norms are so legalistic that we end up doing that we end up deliberating in a judicial way as our organizing norm. And I think, and so that's how I try to understand the normative orders of the various companies I deal with. And so when I spoke earlier about Anita Roddick's body shop, her grounding norm was taking care of your body. And she liked to go to traditional cultures and find out how people in traditional cultures took care of their body and bring those in to the care of it. But that was an unspoken basis of having fun and experimenting with various goods. And the interesting thing was it was having fun that was the clarifying norm. And experimenting was one way in which she was able to bring those two together when they came into conflict. In her organization itself, she said when things come into conflict, growth is the answer. What will enable us to grow? That's how we're going to resolve a conflict between taking care of yourself and having fun. And growth was essentially important to her because she thought only if she grew could she take on the beauty business. If she remained a small store in Brighton, it would be okay. Hippies could go there and nobody would care. So
our listeners are probably wondering why we're talking so much about moral norms. I can assure you more will become clear as we continue through the discussion. We get into moral risk taking and anomalies and dealing with all sorts of things. Maybe a final clarification is what's the difference between a moral norm in a corporate sense to purpose, values, codes of conduct? How do they align or do they?
They do align. I mean, codes of conduct and purpose tend to be your clarifying norms. That is, if you're honest, by the way. If you're really honest about what your purpose is, if you're really honest about what your code of conduct is, then that will be the clarifying norms. Those are the things that you've got your people in your HR working out. And when they find a confusion or a contradiction, you'll get a new memo sent out to you. Uh, and it's you seldom in businesses, unless you've sort of been corrupted by Charles Spinoza or people like him, get your grounding norms inside there. I'm working with one business right now where they've listed 5 norms. One of the key norms is every case that we work on, it's actually a sales organization, so they have cases with customers, has one leader in charge of the whole case. That's a
Right.
clarifying norm. They call that leader the quarterback. Now they have a grounding norm, which is we always endeavor to speak with simplicity.
Okay.
Now, I got that inside their code of conduct. I
Mm.
don't think most places would have that inside their code of conduct. Uh, so, but that now one more thing I want to say that the masterpiece organizations, when they create these norms, they're generally focused on achieving a purpose that people think is sort of odd. Anita Roddick's purpose was to change the beauty business so that women wouldn't feel anxiety over their looks. Well,
Mhm.
that's sort of weird. Well, how can you sell them? Why would women be doing this if they didn't? Well, Anita Roddick's answers because they're having fun and taking care of themselves. But until you get Anita Roddick establishing the body shop, that doesn't make sense. And that's what I'd like. That's the thing that's key to my masterpiece businesses. It doesn't really make the purpose that you are working for doesn't make sense to people until you establish your business and show that it counts. The same is true for Bezos. Really?
Yeah.
Was retail under threat? Walmart was not going to go away. Walmart was going to be there. So there's this little online world where retail fails. Well, we can see the online world has become pretty big, and and with Amazon, it is like traditional retail with customers taking care, owners taking care of customers and so forth. So you wouldn't have seen it as a real life purpose until it actually happens. And then,
Mhm.
wow, it is. The person was onto something. Uh, does that answer the question you asked me?
Yeah, sure, sure. It also drags in another word which I mentioned in the opening, which is vision. So it would then stand to reason that these leaders must have that foresight or they must have that vision that they're passionate about, as you mentioned, that really drives their conviction as they're working towards this new moral norm. It sort of all stacks up, right? In fact, you even talk about, I don't know whether you call it a 5 steps or 5 stages, but you give a sequence of
Right.
how leaders create new moral norms. You talk about living the organization's
Uh,
moral order. You talk about um, encountering
the anomaly.
anomaly, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and conceiving it in a way that enables action, right?
Yeah. I,
Um, please.
Yeah, let me just say something about that because I think it's important. I mean, people when why we're talking about norms and so forth. The answer to that is a masterpiece business changes the norms. It's an organization that creates its own distinctive norms, and when you do that,
Yes.
you've got something that people admire. People say, "Wow, is it something?" People in business, consultants like me, we're constantly telling people, "What's your vision? What's your vision? What's your vision?"
Right.
It doesn't start there. Here's something that I learned the hard way after 25 years. You can go to leaders of businesses, serious leaders of business, and say, what always goes wrong in your business? And you can get an answer. We always take care. We always mistreat loyal customers. We take advantage of them so we can offer goods to new customers to get the new customers around. That's a common one. In erotics, we create anxiety in our customers. We only do what is safe, which is a big one for me with the clients I deal with. We don't do innovation. Recent client. We only create video games that really appeal to the nasty sides of adolescent men. Even when we start out trying to do the reverse, we hit a problem, and it's so easy to go to the nasty side of men. We go there. What do you do wrong? I find that leaders can answer that. I was amazed that leaders can answer that, by the way. I thought that would be the hard question. I thought I'd be writing a book that said, you have to figure out the answer to that question. No, I was wrong. The next question actually is the hard question. The next question is the basis of the vision question. What would you love to do instead?
Mm.
I run into people have a lot of difficulty. Why? Well, leaders have gotten to their position because they're brilliant at managing around the difficulties of the business, of making it so nobody even sees the difficulty that they're managing around. They're brilliant at it. That's how they got the position. So when you say, what would you love to do instead? That throws them back. That throws them back. But it is the question that they've really wanted to answer. It's a question that they're really glad somebody is asking them, at least in the quiet, if they're not having to do it before their team and other people in the company. But as soon as they come up with an answer, what would you like to do instead? Well, then you have something that qualifies as a vision. It's the thing that's going to drive, and then it's going to drive the company. And Bezos came up with, although he didn't tell anybody, I want to have an everything store. That was
Right.
Bezos's vision. Roddick's vision was, I want to have a store that teaches people how to take care of their bodies. That was her vision. The fun part, the compassion part, that was what went along. But then to get that vision, to enact that vision, you have to take moral risks. And my book sort of points out that you have to take moral risks, but then it's sensible to try to take the moral risks in order where you're increasing in the risky niche each time. Not all leaders have done them in order. Leaders tend to be passionate people. They've got their defining purpose. They've got what they would like to do. But in the book, we advise take your moral risks in a.
You use the term mold breakers,
Yes.
which I think is very apt in painting a picture, at least for the leaders who do take those moral risks and create the new norms. I mean, that's essentially what the aim here is they see that vision, they know where they want to get to, but to get there, they have to do something different to where they are today from the status, and they have to break that mold.
Yeah, and if they don't succeed, people will look at them as harsh, as cruel, as we say in the book, as assholes. That's a common term for these kinds of leaders. And so we're getting to the heart of the book.
You also argue that traditional leadership models tend to focus too much in certain areas and not enough on the moral risk taking. So empathy as one example, or I know you mentioned Google and psychological safety, or Amy Edmondson's term of what Google identified, but I mean, this is where the book could tend to become a little bit controversial, right? So in many instances, many of the examples, you're talking about cultivating that courage to take the risk, but not always in a way that would be deemed by everyone to be morally correct.
Exactly.
So there's a little bit of a dichotomy there, right? That on the one side, we get to that outcome, But to get there and be that mold breaker, sometimes they have to do the controversial steps, which don't always see the light of day at the end.
That's true. I think, in fact, they always have to. I'm not sure that you might be able to come up with a case where somebody was able to do these risky things in a way that offended nobody. I haven't found it, and I think it could take a lifetime to find it. And if you did, I don't know that it would be worth anything because I think it's so rare that it would have to remain a rarity. Um, because what you're doing when you create a new moral order, you're essentially telling some people that they're wrong.
Yeah,
And that is always a risky thing to do. Not only are they wrong, but they're wrong about something that they have done for years and years and years, and maybe the industry has done for years and years and years, and has lots of justification for. The, the case that actually drove me to write the book was I have to keep it mostly anonymous, but I was working for a leader in a gas distribution network. Gas distribution is a risky business. Uh, Gas can explode, gas can catch on fire. And when it does, and if you're feeding the fire, it can do lots of destructive stuff and be very, very harmful. And
right.
so it is an industry full of protocols uh, for safety. And, it's an industry where people say safety first, safety first. And you
Yeah,
can say there's a good reason for that. It's also an industry where you might want a little bit of innovation because of the climate and because of uh, other things. In any case, this leader had look, he was somebody that, how shall I put it, hankered after innovation. He constrained himself uh, most of the time and went along. But he had the greatest misfortune befall him that you can have as a leader of gas distribution system. In one of his cities, there was a fire being fed by his gas.
right.
It was in a multi-story building. The shutoff valve was under meters and meters of cement. There was no way to get to it. The maps of the pipes were ancient and were inaccurate. And the protocol basically is you go back and back and back and shut off and shut off and shut off and shut off until you can shut off the gas. He saw that that was a mess because they were trying to rediscover where the pipes were and so forth. He convened his team and said, "Can we do something? Can we do something here that's innovative?" And they said, "I actually think he might have come up with the innovation since he loved it." They said, and I'm not, apologies to engineers among your listeners, I'm going to say this best I understand it. Essentially, find the pipe that we think is pouring the gas and blow up a balloon in it to block the gas. He said, "Okay, let's do it." His team said, "We're not going to back you on this. This is against the protocols. If something goes wrong, we're all going to go to prison. And even if it goes right, we're going to be called before judicial hearings, probably for years and years and years."
Right.
He did it. He took the authority. He took the risk. It was a moral risk. He did it, and it stopped the fire. He believes he saved lives. There's some controversy whether he could have done it the same way by following all the protocols or not, but he believes he saved lives by doing that. And I started working with him very, very shortly after he did that. And he spent half his week in judicial hearings, and it was going to go on for years. And he said, "Charles, did I do the right thing?" I said, "Well, why'd you do?" He said, "Well, number one, I thought it was the best thing to do for the people who were in danger. And number two, I think we need to bring innovation to this business. I think it's the only way we can make it a business that people can appreciate."
Mm.
And another word for admire. And I said, yeah, I think you have to stick by that. And you have to stand for it. He did.
Mm.
And he is one of two companies now that has robots going through the pipes seeking leaks. It has cars above ground going around sniffing for leaks. And he is driving innovation in gas distribution. That to me, that's leadership. That is admirable. That's the story that I encountered the before writing the book. Now, what does he have to do? He's also tough. He
Mm.
has to, people come in and tell him safety, 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 safety. He has to say no, safety, 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 innovation. And that means not all people can work for him. He's got to fire some
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
And he's got to be ruthless to invent this company in gas distribution that values both safety and innovation. And you do take a risk, and had his risk not worked out, he might well be in prison.
Yeah, it's very much the contrarian view that comes to the fore in that moment of decision making. But underlying all of those acts are a set of skills that you speak mostly about throughout the book. And we won't have the time to go through all of them, unfortunately. But I wonder if you could just, talk generally about the different skills that you highlight in the book.
Yeah, okay. Um, I'll go through them quickly and then you can ask me the ones that are interesting. The simplest one is managing moods. You never get into a conversation like the one that the person I just described got into unless you can manage the mood of your senior team. Part of the way you manage your mood is essentially acting as though you're in the mood you want them to be in, even if you don't feel it. And let's face it, when people are losing their lives, it's very hard to be in a serene or inventive mood, which is what
Yeah.
he had to get his team into. A second one, and I know Wayne, you like this, is listening for difference. That is really understanding the opposite side.
Mhm.
People tend to cover that up with empathy. Empathy is different from listening for difference. When we say we're empathetic, we're usually listening to the other person and sympathy to the way they've been mistreated.
Yeah.
Listening for difference is listening to get the whole, how they mistreat other people, how they have been mistreated, what it's like to be in their shoes in all respects, not in the respect where they suffer. So really getting at, listen, I say to people, if you don't know the reason why somebody would hate you, you haven't listened for difference. That's the most extreme version of it.
Mhm.
But that's being able to hear people that way, being able to discover them. Uh, um, Building trust by listening for difference, but also by expressing your virtues,
Mhm.
right? I mean, anybody who trusts me sees that I'm an explainer and finds that admirable. And if you don't find somebody who explains things admirable, as some people don't, some person thinks I just do it for ego gratification, you won't find me admirable and you won't trust me. So I mean, a lot of people conflate trust with just being reliable. Leaders have to build trust by showing their virtues, I believe. And then there's the most important one, seeking and saying truth, speaking truth to power. And power can be your customers. It doesn't just mean your boss. It means your customers. It can be an employee who, if that employee rebels against you, can cause things to go really poorly. Speaking the truth in those instances and finding the way to compose the truth so that you can speak it. Those are the basic skills, I say, that lead up to being able to discover moral anomalies. And then, if you have those skills, to have the courage to take the moral risks to overcome the moral anomalies.
Mhm. There's we could talk for many hours on each of the skills. Um, one of the things that formed in my mind as I was going through the book, Charles, was there tends to be a tension, if you like, between the idealism of moral leadership and the realism of a power dynamics. And we spoke a little bit before we started recording about the Machiavellian insights and the idea. Well, we didn't speak about the actual term, the idea justifies the means, but or the end justifies the means, but you know, how relevant or dangerous is that view in leadership today in the landscape that we're living in? Where do you see all of this at this moment?
Yeah, I think that you're right about Machiavelli. I'm not exactly sure. I reread Machiavelli while writing the book more than once. Uh, and there's only one end that justifies the means for Machiavelli, just to speak as a Machiavelli scholarship for the moment, and that's the survival and stability of the state. You can't have any end justifying the means. Ours in this book is a much more narrow version of Machiavelli. It's not the means don't justify the end. It's when you're facing a moral anomaly. That is, when doing what most people would think is the morally right thing will get you a bad outcome. Will get you an outcome that you believe deep down deep in your heart is not really moral. Think of the burning buildings, following the procedures and doing the right thing. To this leader I was working with, he did not really believe that would get him the best outcome. It wasn't even going to be morally the best outcome. You'd have to have luck for that to work.
Mm.
I think the same is so for Anita Roddick. Going along with the beauty business and maybe tinkering a little bit here and a little bit there to have more friendly products, have a more friendly experience in the store, that was not going to be for her the right outcome.
Mm.
And so forth. So I'm saying it's in these cases where you are facing an anomaly. It's where you've answered the question, what do we always do wrong here? We always do this wrong. We've managed to get by these means, but I still think it's wrong. We need to fix it. That is the moment where you have an argument like the ends justify the means. However, it's not even exactly an argument like the ends just the means. I'm going to make a philosophical point here, Wayne, unless you want to interrupt me and say I've said enough. See, in ends justify the means, you know what the end is you're going for, and you have a pretty clear picture of it. In these cases, when you are overturning the moral anomaly, you don't quite know what the end is.
Mm.
You know, it's different from the current state. You're living in a state of hope that it is going to be a difference that people find admirable. And so it is even scarier than a case where you can say the end justifies the means in a utilitarian case.
Mm.
The end is not quite known. And that to me, that's what makes leadership itself so admirable. Somebody willing to take that chance.
Mm. Is there something like one thing perhaps you hope leaders take away from the book, something they can apply immediately?
Yes, I mean, and actually, I've learned this. I didn't say this, and one of my co-authors thinks that I've turned into a terrible hypocrite. But a number of leaders have said to me, Charles, what I really love about this book is you have given me permission to spend my life making this business into one where I believe I'm doing the right thing for people and not just going for operational effectiveness. And what I think is the right thing is not choosing a purpose off the shelf and saying this is a standard purpose, but really treating customers the way I think that's right. You have given me permission to do that. Thank you. What about the chapter on truth, I say? What about the chapter on moral risks? Hasn't that changed your life? Those are good, Charles, but it's the permission that makes it different. Now, I have reconciled myself to the view that if it does that for leaders, if it enables them to go off and try to create their masterpieces, even if they're not following some of the conceptual practices I lay out or some of the simple pragmatic skills I lay out, uh, I consider that a success. And I thank any leader who does it. I do think that I do give you some good advice about how to tell truth to power. I do tell you how to manage your moods. I do
Mhm.
tell you how to organize your moral risks. But if you go for it and you ignore all of that, that's on me. That's my fault. I didn't do a good enough job, but I did enough of a job for you to go out and create a masterpiece.
As I said earlier, one of the things, the best takeaways for me is it forced me to think, and it forced me to go deep within and look back over my own journey and challenge my own self. How much was I living in my belief system and not willing to take the risks that maybe I should have? If we look ahead, do you see any big moral anomalies emerging, whether it's in business? Maybe we steer clear of the politics. We could talk about that for a long time. But is there anything emerging in business that you see where mold breakers or moral risk takers will step
I,
in?
yeah, yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm seeing one. It's hard for me to say I'm seeing. I'm seeing a bunch, but let me just talk about one. And I think it's coming from our political times today. Uh, I believe we are experiencing the rise of businesses where people in businesses understand truth itself quite differently. I'm calling them plural truth businesses. And people, leaders in those businesses, are developing new ways to manage that actually defy some of what I say in the book and are creating distinctive businesses. Now, that sounds very abstract. Let me give you something, Kate. So just for listeners to keep it in mind, think of a single genius business. Think of Bob Dylan. I'm sorry for the baby boom reference. I apologize. I'm a baby boomer, but I think most people know Bob Dylan, even if they're not baby boomers. There's a genius, and his songs come together, and the lyrics paint a really brilliant thing. And I love Bob Dylan. Now, and this is more of a baby boomer reference, think Lennon and McCartney. Those are two guys with two very different views of
Mhm.
what truth is, what good music is. John Lennon's more of a philosopher. Paul McCartney, let's say it, likes to write love songs. And if you were around in the 60s, one of the conversations you had was, I bet John wrote that line. I think that line was written by Paul because you could feel the tension in the
Mhm.
music. You can feel the tension right there. And that's one of the things that made it really jump and pop. And so there are businesses that are being formed today where the leaders really have quite different views. And the leader of that business is allowing them to have their different views, is not trying to bring them together, not trying to have them decide what's fundamentally going on in our business. But, and this is the anomaly today, trying to get them to work diplomatically with each other,
Mhm.
hold on to their differences, and work diplomatically with each other so we can delight in one being in the lead with the other creating dissonance that we love. And so, how does that play out in business? I'm working with a sales organization right now. One leader in that business believes that the way you sell is you show that the product is what they're going to need in the future by laying out a model of the world and the future so they can see exactly the place it's going to fill in that future where they need it. Another one, and that's a correspondence theory of truth if you're a philosopher. Another one says, no, you can't do that. You have to get the client to have hands-on experience with using. this product. And once you use the product, you can see you can use it here, you can use it here, you can use it for this. It becomes familiar to you. And it's out of that you buy the product because you have a sense of how you're going to be able to use it on and on. The other one thinks that's not all nonsense. One guy is, in the clouds, the other guy is on the ground. He says, what you have to do is you have to show how this product brings unity to the family. And if you show them how the product brings unity to the family, that's what they're going to buy. The product comes second. That would be a coherence view of truth. And the interesting thing is, from each of those perspectives, you can argue endlessly. You're never going to convince the other. But bringing them together in particular sales gives the client something far, far better, a far better experience, far more understanding of his or her life and the product. And I think the anomaly then is, how are we going, is that there's these kind of post-truth or plural truth businesses. How can we make them work? And how can we believe that they're a good thing? And that's what people are working on right now. And you can probably hear that, to me, some of the stuff that Trump does, he's a kind of coherent truth. He tells a story. Other people are fact of the matter. How can we bring them together and create something where the dissonances add to the beauty of the other view? Did that make sense, Wayne, or was I too abstract?
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. And I pondering as you're talking, but I was wondering, where AI and the whole technology shift will play its hand in that scenario. I think that will be an interesting aspect as well to consider.
Yes, I'm trying to. I was just at a conference recently where everybody was talking about AI and business. And I think my book does speak to that. They kept saying, jobs are going to be replaced. And so long as you think business is about providing lots of goods fairly cheaply, or lots of quality goods fairly cheaply, then jobs are going to be replaced because AI is going to be able to produce fairly decent quality goods and far cheaper than we can. But if you think business is really about creating organizations that give us good lives, then we're not going to be, or we're going to start eliminating jobs. We're going to realize that that's not what we want. We want these organizations that create good lives and that intertwine with their customers in creating good lives. So you're not going to have the hard line between the business A and customer B. And AI then supports a world that involves creating organizations where people can exercise moral imagination, do hard work, and do good things. Because it's not just about getting those goods out the door more cheaply. And I think that the more masterpieces leaders create, the more it's going to be evident that business is about creating masterpieces, not about getting goods out the door. That's all the operational excellence talk. That's what business consultants give leaders to do right now with all their frameworks. And that's what the heart of leaders rebels against.
Charles, fascinating conversation, incredible book, Leadership as Masterpiece Creation, what business leaders can learn from the humanities about moral risk-taking. Where can people access the book?
I think Amazon is the easiest place to access the book. It was in Barnes and Noble. I send people to Amazon. I think it's around. The audiobook should be coming out for those who like those in a couple of weeks.
Nice. Probably by the time this episode releases, it could be available. So,
yeah.
What about connecting with you or following you?
My LinkedIn account is the easiest way to find me.
Mhm.
It's LinkedIn, Charles, I think hyphen Spinosa is the easiest way. And I think you should be able to find it very easily Googling me with that. And in that account, I also give my email account. So if you want to email me, you can use the LinkedIn account to email me. And if you are reading the book and have questions about it, I try to respond to everybody who's got a question.
Gosh, you might want to be careful you open that door to me.
Wayne, I hope your listeners know how remarkable you are as an interviewer. I have never had somebody so far ask me such detailed, penetrating questions. I really, really appreciate it. The homework you do in order to be able to do this podcast, uh, uh, it's heartwarming. Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for the comment. Charles, we're out of time, unfortunately, so we'll have to wrap up. But really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure our listeners did. Again, the book is called Leadership as a Masterpiece, or Leadership as Masterpiece Creation. I like to throw the A in there for some reason, but Leadership as Masterpiece Creation. You'll find it on Amazon, as Charles mentioned. It'll be coming out on Audible probably around the time of the release of this episode, so you'll be able to get there as well. Charles, thank you so much, and look forward to staying in contact.
Wayne, thank you. Thank you very, very much.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.